Welcome to the Sleep Dives channel. In this explainer, we're jumping into pages 36 to 70 of our source material. And this is where we really shift gears, moving from the theory of learning organizations into the practical challenge of actually building one. We're going to tackle the biggest question of all. Where on earth do you even start?
So yeah, this is the big one, isn't it? The question that just keeps coming up. I mean, it's one thing to get your head around all the concepts and theories, but it's a completely different challenge to actually start the journey. So this part of our analysis is all about moving from those abstract ideas to the real, tangible architecture you need to create lasting change.
All right, to really get our heads around this, let's use a metaphor, a really powerful one. I want you to imagine yourself as an architect. You're standing in a wide open field, but in your mind, you have this incredible vision for a new building. Now, you don't just start throwing bricks around, do you? Of course not. You need a blueprint, a plan, an architecture that's going to hold the entire thing together. And it's exactly the same for building a learning organization.
And that blueprint, that architecture, is built on three core pillars. Think of it like a triangle. On one side, you have your guiding ideas. On another, you have your theory, methods, and tools. And holding it all up, forming the base, are innovations in infrastructure. Each one is absolutely essential. If you try to build without one of them, the whole structure just comes tumbling down.
All right, so let's dig into pillar number 1, guiding ideas. You can think of this as the philosophical cornerstone of the whole project. This is the why behind everything else you're about to do. It's the foundation. So what exactly are guiding ideas? Well, they're basically the soul of the organization. And listen, we're not talking about some bland mission statement that a few execs cooked up over a weekend retreat. No way. We're talking about deeply held principles, the kind that only come from serious thought, deep study, and constant conversation. They spell out what the organization truly stands for and what its people are genuinely trying to create in the world.
And this quote, man, it just hits the nail on the head. Bill O'Brien, the former CEO of Hanover Insurance, put it perfectly. He saw that so many companies are just polluted by bad ideas that reinforce themselves, Ideas like climb the corporate ladder no matter who you step on. The only way to fight that, he says, is to consciously cultivate powerful, positive, guiding ideas that are just better. Now, the source gives us 3 really profound examples of these guiding ideas, all coming from a systems thinking perspective. And each one, you'll notice, really pushes back against our usual Western way of thinking. First, the primacy of the whole. This idea that the world is already a web of relationships. We don't create them, we're just part of them. Second, the community nature of the self, which argues that we aren't isolated individuals. Our very identity is shaped by our connections to others. And third, the generative power of language, the mind-bending idea that the words we use don't just describe reality, they actually create it.
Okay, so you've got your why, you have your philosophy, but that's just the start. How do you actually bring it to life? Well, that brings us to our second pillar, theory, methods, and tools. These are the practical engines that help people not just learn new skills, but more importantly, develop entirely new ways of thinking.
Buckminster Fuller had this absolutely brilliant insight about this. You can't just order someone to think differently. It just doesn't work, does it? But if you give them a new tool, something tangible like a systems diagram or a reflective exercise, the very act of using that tool starts to rewire their brain. The tools are the gateway to new thinking.
But, and this is a huge but, the tools are pretty much useless unless they are deeply connected to a solid theory. A tool without a theory might work once, maybe by pure luck, but you'll have no idea why it worked, you can't repeat it, you can't build on it, it doesn't transform anything. But when that same tool is backed by a clear theory, it builds real, repeatable knowledge and creates insights that stick. And that leads us right to the third and final piece of our architecture, innovations in infrastructure. This is all about creating the space, the social architecture, if you will, where learning can actually thrive as a natural part of the daily work, not as some special event.
Now, when we say infrastructure, I want you to get the image of buildings and IT servers out of your head. That's not what we mean here. We're talking about the organizational structures, the day-to-day work processes, and how you allocate precious resources like people's time and money. It's about weaving learning into the very fabric of the business.
So what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, let's look at a few examples. At Shell, they transformed their whole planning process. It stopped being about predicting the future and started being about helping managers learn and challenge their assumptions. At AT&T, the chairman knew they needed a different kind of conversation, so he created special forums for learning, totally separate from the usual decision-making meetings. And at the car company Saturn, they literally built a learning laboratory right next to the real assembly line so teams could experiment and solve problems on the fly. Okay, so we've got our three pillars: guiding ideas, theory and tools, and infrastructure. But here's the absolute key. You can't treat them like a checklist. They have to work together as a single integrated system. If you neglect any one of them, the whole effort is pretty much guaranteed to fail.
And this table, it just lays it all out, plain and simple. Look what happens when one piece is missing. If you don't have those guiding ideas, there's no passion, no purpose. People just end up chasing the latest management fad. If you don't have theory and tools, nothing really changes. People talk about openness, but it's all superficial. And if you don't have the right infrastructure, all the good intentions in the world don't matter because there's no time, no space, and no resources. Learning just isn't taken seriously.
You know, the whole quality circle movement back in the day is a perfect, almost tragic example of this in action. Companies introduced a new infrastructure, this new type of meeting, but they failed to provide the workers with the actual statistical tools they needed or to build a deep guiding philosophy around what quality really meant. And because the other two pillars were missing, the whole thing just fizzled out. So we've built this incredible external architecture, right? With these three strong pillars. But it makes you stop and ask, what's it all for? What is it all supposed to be supporting? Because the true foundation for all of this isn't a policy or program. It's something much, much closer to home. And this is where we get to the absolute heart of the matter. This quote really says it all. An organization isn't some machine you can tinker with. It's a living, breathing product of how the people inside it think and how they interact. That means the biggest lever for change isn't in rewriting the org chart or shifting budgets. The real leverage is in ourselves. Okay, so this idea of looking inward is great, but how do you do it? How can you actually tell if real, genuine learning is happening in your team or your company? Well, thankfully, the source gives us a really practical checklist you can use to find out. Let's go through these 4 questions together because they're an incredibly powerful way to diagnose what's going on. First, do we constantly test our experiences, even when everything is going great? It's easy to reflect after a failure, right? But a real learning culture questions its successes. Second, are we actually producing new knowledge? And by that we mean a real, tangible ability to act more effectively, not just collecting more data. Third, is that knowledge shared? Is it accessible? If a brilliant idea stays locked in one person's head, it's not organizational learning. And finally, number 4, is this learning actually relevant to our core purpose? Does it help us do what we're here to do? And this really brings us to the biggest trap, the most common mistake that organizations fall into time and time again. They get really excited about one piece of the puzzle. They'll buy a flashy new collaboration tool or announce a big restructure, but they do it in a vacuum, completely ignoring the need for a guiding philosophy or the right infrastructure to support it. That is a recipe for failure. Real, lasting progress only ever happens when you are patiently and intentionally developing all 3 pillars together in balance. So, to wrap this all up, what's the big takeaway? It's that building a learning organization means you have to think like an architect. You need a clear blueprint that brings together profound guiding ideas, powerful theories and tools, and a supportive infrastructure. But you have to remember that all of it, every single piece, is ultimately designed to spark a fundamental shift inside each of us. And that leaves us with one final, very personal question. The architecture gives you the how, but it can't give you the what. That part is up to us. So the real question you need to walk away with isn't just about the framework. It's about your own vision. What kind of organization are you helping to build?